Okay, welcome to my presentation of strategy and reform um, of my project. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. And okay, hopefully you can see that. Okay, so this is the strategy and reform design portion of this semester's project. And again, I'm going to start with the summary of my needs assessment. And again, this is for New City School and a private independent school in the city of St. Louis, where my problem of practice is situated, but also when we've been talking about curricular reforms, specifically in music and social studies and culturally responsive teaching, which is something that I've done work at other schools, as well as New City. But that's kind of changed the focus based on a variety of circumstances. With one, we're doing our reaccreditation a year. We're about to have a site visit from our accreditation team. And one of the aspects that we've looked at in writing our equity and inclusion chapter is that just enacting curriculum reform isn't dealing with an underlying need amongst the faculty to build efficacy and build confidence that they're actually making progress in their teaching. And this is not just a New City school experience, but something that we've seen across the board in the literature review for my own problem of practice is that teachers feel overwhelmed, and just adding another curriculum or curricular piece to the puzzle isn't serving as a good way to implement effective teaching, but it's not dealing with the overall issue of efficacy and collective efficacy that teachers need to feel successful. So and move on a little bit from just some other things that I put in the needs assessment. This, going back in the data of New City School, when we did our self-study accreditation planning, I'm just going to go down to our plans and priorities, because that's something that we're talking about this semester, is that ensuring teachers are given adequate support to build professional capital and capacity regarding promoting equity and inclusion in the classroom and beyond. And so we're looking at the needs of, well, we want to do these things, but are we giving them to have the supports to actually do that? So again, there's something at the heart of these that we really want to get to. This is other strategic plan initiatives that we've had back in 2018. And we've, for example, of just implementing curriculum approaches and curricular, adding new things to the curriculum. We've done a lot of that since 2018. And actually throughout this reaccreditation cycle, it's really not been a problem that things have been implemented. It's, are these things becoming consistent practices, and is that generating a collective efficacy among teachers, and do they feel that they're becoming instructional experts, and that is that creating a student achievement and good learning outcomes for students. So this is kind of a linear approach, and that's one of the things that when I've got back to some of the change models that we looked at in Dr. Porter's class, and then I've gone back to these in this particular curriculum class, is that these change models, the slide before really looks like that Kotter's 8-step change model that we see in a lot of organizational developments. And I know that that's an old model, but the point is that, yeah, it's kind of outdated and it doesn't really serve well. That, okay, we create this sense of urgency and we create a coalition that we've got to change, add this new piece to the curriculum. We get everybody involved, and then we embed this change and we add to it. And it's just like we're just rolling another boulder up the hill. And looking at some of these more cyclical framework models, that was something that really resonated with me before, and it continues to resonate as we thought about new things to the curriculum, which gets back to some other things from our needs assessment, is that when we did a school climate survey, and we've done many of these school climate surveys, highlighted in red here, and this is from a presentation that I just did with my stakeholders and my um, at school for both the problem of practice and this curriculum class, is the faculty they are showing that their view of whether the school is achieving its mission is widely different than, say, parents, students, trustees. Their feeling of whether they're achieving and that they're even that students feel well known by the school, faculty are scoring themselves really low and scoring the school really low, especially compared to the other constituents. And this is kind of hidden in the overall data, that everything looks really kind of fine and we're championing this, but it is this continuing issue. And some of these overall needs assessments of looking at teacher satisfaction, particularly among private school teachers, and retention rates for private school teachers, which are actually not as good as public schools. So even though private schools like to champion the notion that they're independent and free of a lot of things, that private school teacher turnover rate is twice as high as public school teachers, and that this has been that way and accelerating since 1987. So is that something that we need to look at? We would say yes. And looking at this, if you're adding more and more things onto a teacher's plate, are you creating this overload of feedback, an overload of these processes and systems? And if the answer is always add more to the curriculum, and then the teacher's swimming around in more and more things to handle and try to implement, and it creates this kind of blizzard of guidance, which I've cited before in this Brick et al. From 2015. And then it becomes an overwhelming issue from an administrator standpoint, is saying, well, then this must be that the teachers can't handle this, or we have to get better teachers, or we have to something, it's our evaluation and supervision of the teachers, and not looking at this as a systemic structural problem that's going on, rather than something missing from the curriculum. So it may not be that we need to add more to the curriculum, it's do we need to streamline and become more efficient and tailor made so that we can be responsive to students and teachers. And a lot of this is again looking at the needs assessment and the empathy builders from our own problem of practice, but going back and saying, well, this is kind of a really resonating thing. So if I was doing a project about adding another thing to the curriculum, it really wasn't making a lot of sense. So where did that really get to? I'm moving ahead to some really pertinent things that just have happened recently. In association with, and this is kind of an issue with, it's been a challenge with this class, is that we are having a stakeholder team for this class, but we also have a stakeholder team for our problem of practice. And I've been implementing an open-ended research question, or open-ended survey, for my teachers at my school for my problem of practice. We've been doing the initial research for that while also doing this. And so I'm trying to marry the two, one, just out of respect for the teachers that I'm asking to be part of this. And I think we found some good findings that I wanted to share just from my initial survey data about my problem of practice, but how this also relates to this particular class, and how a really targeted reform might serve both interests. So here are my overall research questions for my problem of practice. How does the professional development for teachers adhere to a theoretical model of deliberate practice, if at all? How does deliberate practice of professional development and instructional feedback inform a professional capital and professional capacity for teachers, if at all? And how will providing professional development for teachers in accordance with the framework of deliberate practice improve the self and collective efficacy of teachers, if at all? And those underlying research questions, I looked at several questions that I put out in an open-ended survey question, and some really important feedback came back that I think informs, again, both this particular class and my problem of practice. One, teachers at New City School, more than anything, valued, number one, autonomy and decisional capital, that they when they're choosing their professional development, when they're choosing the things that they can be focused on practicing as teachers, that they felt that it was specific to their needs, and that they had choice in it, and they had autonomy to make choices that were specific to how they could become better teachers. Second was collaboration with other teachers and a chance to build social capital. And then the third was that they really wanted knowledge and overall, new information about teaching. But that really put things in priorities. My second question from the survey was professional development activities that either meet or do not meet their professional growth needs. So this is really important if you're trying to add something new to the curriculum and trying to support teachers in doing that, is that when we do this overall with teachers, 56, most teachers at New City School kind of said, we've had both when we're doing these things. Some of this is really important, and some of it I don't need. And 34.78% of teachers, that's a third of teachers, really only listed that their professional development and what we're doing was only seen as a negative. It was kind of, it didn't pertain to what they really wanted. So that's something to think about when we're, if we're targeting a new piece to the curriculum. Is that going to, who's that resonating with, and are we making sure that it's targeted to the individuals that teach in that specific capacity? My third question was really the lack of clarity of how this, how the things that we're doing with professional development or with research or any of things really is helping teachers. There's this 95.65% of the respondents used in my survey said they were not sure. It was unclear of how professional development was selected. So if we're making a new curricular approach and they really had no autonomy or connection to the decision that was being made, there's not a greater buy-in. Now, what does that have to do with this particular project? Well, I think teachers really do not want another thing to do that's not really about what they need in their classroom or what they need with their students. So running them in circles in an exercise just for my own particular teaching interests, I really didn't want to do that. And I really wanted to connect with what their needs were, so that we're changing this overwhelming sense of not sure that how this applies to me. And I wanted to apply to those teachers, and specifically the teachers on my teaching team. And so here gets into deliberate practice. That time is a central issue, that the schedule often prevents or limits time to do the type of collaborative learning and deliberate practice of teaching that teachers want to do. So if we're going to add a reform piece, if we're going to add something to the curriculum, it really needs to be cognizant of how we're going to do that in terms of time, how we're going to do that in terms of the practical logistics, and how we're going to give teachers the capacity to do that works for them and can be deliberately practiced. So, and that also gets back to the issues of feedback. Now, I know all of that really is talking about my problem of practice and not necessarily a curricular reform strategy for this class. But again, when I did the needs assessment, and even though my best intention was let's put in another culturally responsive curriculum approach, or let's create some goals about that, as in my context, we've already done that several times. And instead of that building a sense of collective efficacy, it actually harms it. And it hurts the resilience of teachers, because the SMART goal that they set at professional development in the fall is not talked about again until the spring, and it's left unfulfilled. So it was like we found something missing in the curriculum. We identified it. We said this needs to be fixed, but we didn't give any teachers the capacity to fix it or implement it. We come back to it in the spring and say, oh, it wasn't fixed, and we still need to work on this. It's ongoing discussion. And then the next year, there's another thing. And then the next year, there's another thing. And my whole point was we need to stop doing that. So what's the actual reform strategy? Well, it really gets back to empowering teachers, which is at the root of my problem of practice. That teachers need to build professional capacity. They need a way to push through with resilience and to places of confidence, push through with resilience and persistence to get that confidence that they need to have collective efficacy of teachers. How do we do that? Well, there's a cycle of deliberate practice that is needed to take place. So how do we embed actual deliberate practices in there? And I won't get into all the specifics of my actual dissertation and actual study that gets into clarifying deliberate practice. But for this particular situation, it's okay, let's create an actual prototype that teachers can, on my teaching team, which includes a 5th and 6th grade math teacher, a 5th and 6th grade science teacher, a 5th and 6th grade reading teacher, myself teaching social studies, and a 1st grade teacher. How can we look at our 4th quarter and use this as a prototyping way of implementing deliberate practices? Deliberate practice comes from Erickson et al. 93, but actually he continued with this actually until he just recently passed away. But the criteria of deliberate practice is really rooted that you're not just doing something, you're always doing something with the imperative that you're trying to improve, with the motivation that you're trying to improve yourself, not just do something. So you don't just practice to practice, you're practicing to improve. And so this idea of clear goals. Well, so here's are the specific strategies that I'm wanting to implement now in the 4th quarter at New City School. 1, that we define what instructional expertise is. So a key aspect of deliberate practice that Erickson, we were just talking about, is that you're doing this to improve. You're not just doing something to do something, we're doing it to improve. And that we're trying to make sure that teachers know that this is not just something added on their plate, that this really is about guiding their own instructional expertise. Where does that come from? Schulman, 1987, Grant, 2021, identified that instructional expertise means that you are seeking expertise in your content area. You are seeking expertise in the pedagogy related to teaching that content. And that 3, you are seeking expertise in how to relate and apply those pedagogical approaches to specific student needs and their context. So that's the 3 criteria. And so that's the first reform strategy, is making sure that we define what instructional expertise is and define that that's the goal of deliberate practice. So that's clear amongst teachers. The second reform strategy is, how do we apply deliberate practice in teaching? Well, we saw the long criteria from Erickson. Grant, 2021, clarified this down a little bit to say, well, you need a well-defined learning target or goal. And I think the word target might be better than goal, because a goal seems very broad. But I think a learning target is more in line with what you would do, say if you were a basketball coach, or a baseball coach, or a music teacher. And our learning target is this specific measure. We are trying to fix this measure in music, from measure 32 to measure 36, and we are trying to make sure that those 16th notes are done correctly. Or we are trying to not turn the ball over in the corner when we're facing a full court press. So a learning target is something very specific. We need to get immediate feedback for teachers and students so that they know that the learning target is either being achieved and improved or not. Was that a successful attempt? Was that not a successful attempt? How do we reflect on that to make new learning targets? So once those measures are completed, once this task is completing, how does that inform the next learning target, and how do we repeat that? So this is letting teachers know, okay, that's what we mean by deliberate practice and teaching, this cycle of creating learning targets and goals, and that you're doing that cycle habitually, and you're applying that. And it can be that simple of just saying, this is what we're doing today, and we're going to go back and do it and tomorrow, and creating that buy-in. The point is that you're doing the cycle, not that you're writing a big lesson plan or you're talking about it, that you're actually implementing the practice cycle. That's why the fourth one is so important, that you consistently repeat it. And so here's the reform target. And I don't want this to be misunderstood that we're just doing lesson plans and journaling and charting it, because I've been at schools where you had to turn specific lesson plans in. You were due every Sunday night, and you wondered if anyone was ever reading them. But the point is that the teachers are really using this as a deliberate practice tool technique, and that it's also going to become the data that they're going to use in the fourth quarter. So the idea is power goal lesson planning. And I particularly really like power goals for a couple reasons that I said in a previous paper. One, I think it's imperative, if you're talking about confidence and collective efficacy, that you state up front that you're saying this in the affirmative. You're saying it in a positive tone. You're not just specifying this, but it's positive in tone. It's forward thinking in tone. So that's a big one. And I like that the positive tone nature, and I think that will resonate with teachers, is saying, how can you say this in affirmative? How can we say this isn't something that's missing from the curriculum, but this is something that we want to put in there, or this is something that I want to improve? That it's outcome oriented and owned by the teacher, so that the teacher really needs to set that target. I can think of my colleague who's the math teacher that we teach the sixth grade class, and we are the advisors for that class. But what she's going to want to do in the math class and make sure that she gets done by the end of this year, that's going to be different than what I can think of Denise with that teaches the ELA classes. But that it needs to be owned by the teacher. What are the what, when, who, why, and how specific? I think the what is needed that we see from Dan Tozy, added these other things in there to say that the practical, streamlined, and efficient logistics that are in there of, okay, let's see all those things that are needed in order to do this. How do we prepare the classroom? So, if I really like this because we do this in sports all the time. If we're going to do a dribbling drill, I might know I need to put up cones. I might know, how long am I going to do this for? 8 minutes. I might know, okay, we're going to have 2 lines. Is everybody just standing in line and they only get to go twice? So thinking all the practical, streamlined parts of lesson planning is actually really important, and really important to just kind of write that down as a tool and see how many reps that you got through. How can we apply that to the classroom? Those are the practical logistics. The evidence and the data informed. So how are you collecting evidence? How are you keeping track of those things? Again, this doesn't have to be overwhelming data that comes from a standardized test. Again, thinking in kind of a basketball standpoint, we do 4-minute layups. Our goal is to get 31 layups. And if we get it, then the goal becomes 32. And we know, did we get it? Did we not get it? If we've done a musical class, and you're saying, okay, I need to play that 5 times in a row correctly, or 10 times in a row correctly before I move on. Am I using a metronome? There's lots of ways that you can get informal and formal data and keep track of that in this in a form. And relationship focus, that again, this is something that you're sharing not just with the teachers and not just with the students, and building that sense of, hey, we're making progress, and giving them the feedback and giving them the evidence, but also that the teachers are doing this. So our goal is that we're going to be sharing that in our teacher planning meetings. So the gathering of the evidence. Well, we have the student learning outcomes. What's the data from grades, informal and formal assessments? How is this going to look in the fourth quarter? We know we're going to be doing journaling that's coming up. What's this going to look? There's an efficacy scale. There's a couple models that I've been looking at of whether I introduce that with teachers and do it again at the end of the fourth quarter. I'm not sure about this because we've been doing so much survey data, or that I feel like I'm going to the well one too many times. So I'll think about whether we use that. Focus group discussions. We have a regular teacher meeting on Tuesdays where I can be gathering responses back from teachers in a dialogue about how this is going. Do they feel it's improving their professional practice? Do they feel like they're building instructional expertise? And that the Power Goal lesson documentation and journals themselves is going to generate data. It's going to generate evidence that we can look at. And I'm really, what I mean by the Power Goal lesson plan is literally a lesson plan, a form that's just like a practice plan, a basketball practice plan that the teachers can use each week to say that this is what we're looking to implement. I'll have to create some buy-in among my teachers that whether that really can work, and I might just fill it out with them on Tuesdays. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. The discussion and limitations. Well, I do think the overall challenging thing this semester is straddling both implementing the initial part of our problem of practice, as well as generating another group of stakeholders with a curricular approach. So I'm trying to balance those things with other things that are happening with our school, with reaccreditation. We're filling new positions. So there's a lot of things that are going on that are making teachers, including myself, it's an anxious time, and we're trying to balance that and work through all of that. So I think it's really important in a time where I'm looking at teacher confidence, teacher efficacy. The last thing I want to do is have teachers do something that there's not a lot of buy-in to. I think we were not going to get a lot of response rates. I think my fellow colleagues have seen that. If they don't feel that this is also something that is serving their own professional growth, and that they see of this as being, oh, this is something that can help me. This is you really being empathetic and trying to help serve my needs, rather than this is something for your class and I'd love to help you, but I just don't have any time for that. So I think that's a real challenge with that. And I think that overall, that's the real challenge when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work, is that because for so many reasons we're fractured, our media and social media and all those things are making us fractured as a society, fractured as individuals. Our politics, we're very polarized. So people are very siloed and disconnected, and we can have the best of intentions to champion these causes, but if we're not doing that team building, that community building, that is its own deliberate practice, that these things are going to fall apart, and that opening these things can be opening a Pandora's box that can get out of control. And that's another thing that I really liked about Power Goals is that the relationships, that it's really it's about relationships between teachers and teachers, but also the relationships between teachers and students. So again, that it's a continuous cycle of practice of saying we're never going to arrive, but we are going through this and we're back at it again and we're back at it again. And let's just kind of the what is it, Finding Nemo, where they say just keep on swimming, just keep swimming. So that's my reform strategy here as we go into the fourth quarter. I know it's still a lot all over the place, but that's just kind of the way it is. I do think the goal here is to get a good sense of a prototype of how to use Power Goal lesson planning as a way, as another intervention technique that that actually can demonstrate how deliberate practice can help teachers and help build their collective efficacy. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm actually going to stop recording. And thank you very much.